Writing with Style, Chapters 8 and 14 by Madison, Maddie, and me, Sophia. So, Chapter 8 was focusing on superstitions. These are things that people assume you can't put into your writing, but you actually can. Now, the first one mentioned is the use of contractions. Contractions like can't and don't, people use in their everyday speaking. These are perfectly fine to put into your writing because sometimes you're supposed to pretend like you're talking to a friend. Your writing comes out easier that way. Breaking up every word it won't sound right. The next one is pronouns, like referring to the reader as you or if you use the pronoun I. Now, when you're giving your opinion on something, using I you have to do. And if you want a true connection with the reader, mentioning them or saying you like you're speaking out, or even if you just need to say it, is totally fine. A lot of people assume that these are wrong and you're not allowed to use them into your writing, but many professionals use them and you're allowed to also. Now, the next one is splitting an infinitive. An infinitive is a sentence like to go or to read. Splitting this is perfectly fine, and a lot of people do this. Sometimes they just assume that it's grammatically incorrect, but it's really not. Sentence structure. Like writing a paragraph with only one sentence, when you're transitioning into another paragraph, a paragraph in between that with one or two sentences is great. A lot of people assume that you're not allowed to do this and every paragraph has to have the standard 5 or more sentences, but that's not true. Using but and as sentence starters. Using this adds variety to your writing. You can't start the sentence with the same thing every time, and using these changes it up. The next one is ending a sentence with a preposition. Ending a sentence with a preposition usually people assume is grammatically incorrect and that you actually can't use them, but we use them in everyday life and they're not wrong. Two things that every writer should know. If you wouldn't say it, don't write it. If it's not true to you and something you would never say in real life, you shouldn't write it down. Your writing is supposed to reflect who you are, not anyone else. And the second one is don't write any sentence that you can't speak easily. If you can't be put on the spot to read your essay aloud and you're tripping up over the words, you shouldn't be writing it down. It should be something that comes easy to you. All these things, and there's plenty more, but they add variety and sentence structure. They make your work different and special, and it's also very mature to use these things in your writing. Just because someone assumes that you can't put it in there doesn't mean that you can't.
So in Chapter 14, quoting of Writing with Style, we in quotations and punctuation at the end. You use a comma when your quote is short and you are introducing it with a phrase like she said or he replied. You use a colon when you made a statement and are trying to prove it if it exceeds one sentence or when indenting the quote. Commas and periods always go inside closing quotation marks, even if it's not part of the original quote. Colons, semicolons, exclamation marks, and question marks go outside closing quotation marks. Miscellaneous small points. So when referring to a certain word, you have to make sure you isolate it from surrounding text by quotation or italics. Indented quotes. So indent quotes that exceed 4 lines. Verse quotes indented of exceeding 2 lines. Block quotes are single-spaced and moderately indented from the left to the right margins. Orphan quotes. An orphan quote is a quote lacking explicit attribution. A blind quote is a quote that attributed to some vague unnamed source, like a congressman. Blind quotes are sometimes needed to protect a source, but orphans are always a no, don't use them. Dialogue. So rule number 1 of dialogue is authenticity before all else. So avoid semicolons, nonsense like all, you're not that old, she grinned. Let the reader do 90% of the exclamation points and italics. Set a person's name off with a comma and direct address. Root around hard-to-spell grunts and noises. Mirror how people talk in real life with commas and slices. Punctuation, run-on quotes on poetry. Use a slash to determine the end of a line and beginning of the next. References for quotations. Make sure to specify page reference for each quote. You can do this by a footnote. And if you are quoting multiple authors, use last name, comma, page number in parentheses. And lastly, ellipses. So ellipses are those 3 dots, and they are used to show when you have omitted some text in a quotation.